This week our topic is on setting goals and objectives. And if you asked me what chapter, if I had to pick just one chapter from our text that I thought was the most important chapter of the entire semester, it would be this one. Because this one is actually the chapter that gives you the objectives for measuring what it is you're going to do and the plan for what you plan to do and hope that things work out based on a hypothesis. So this chapter really connects the dots. And in fact, the chapters from this point moving forward are really about the evaluation and looking at budgets and some of those kinds of things that are more administrative or managerial. But this chapter really is my favorite in terms of connecting you with the content about program evaluation, a needs assessment, and how those things all link together to measure impact and that I am making a difference. So I want to point out a few things in this chapter, highlight a few things. In the quiz, I actually go over these again because these are the most important concepts from chapter 7 on setting goals and objectives. They bring back the logic model. We've talked about the logic model for at least 3 weeks now, so hopefully you have a really good handle about what this looks like. You've critiqued the logic model, but this particular chapter then goes over the inputs, process, outputs, outcomes, and impacts again and provides an example and gives you a definition. You've been through the SciFAR modules, you've evaluated this. This should be review. But when we get to the outcome objectives, I really want you to see how these then connect with the logic model. Chapter starts out talking about a mission statement. That mission is that overall goal or that overall overarching reason for being, if you will. A mission statement formalizes the reason for existence by providing a long-term sense of direction and continuity. So a mission statement really should have some longevity. A good mission statement is lofty, inspiring, concise, and understandable. And what's sort of funny about this particular statement is that for something to be lofty and inspiring, sometimes requires more descriptive kinds of words and gets away from being concise. But you have to be able to do that in one mission statement to really get folks engaged or really understand your reason for existence. A good, clear mission statement is usually limited to just a few sentences. Interestingly enough, if you look at a program and you say, what's your mission? What is it you're supposed to accomplish here? And if that organization doesn't have it, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, why do you exist? Why is this happening? So a mission statement is really clear for both programs and organizations. And quite honestly, your text makes a big deal out of it being just programs. But institutions or organizations have mission statements, and then underneath that you would have programs. And within those programs, you may in fact have projects. So there's kind of a hierarchy there. Don't get confused by thinking that it's always a program. Organizations, as I'm going to point out, have mission statements. So for example, here's Utah State Universities. If you go to the President's Office page, the mission of Utah State University is to be one of the nation's premier student-centered land-grant, space grant universities by fostering the principle that academics come first, by cultivating diversity of thought, culture, and by serving the public through learning, discovery, and engagement. I'm not sure any of you have ever looked at this mission statement for Utah State University. It's on the President's page. But really, a land-grant university is about academics, extension, and research. That was the whole point of founding of the land-grant universities. Extension is the idea that we take what is found in research out to the public at large, and that's why you see this last statement, serving the public through learning, discovery, and engagement. They don't mention the word extension, but that's really what it relates to, because when you look at the seal for Utah State University, you will see education, research, and extension. It's called the three-legged stool of a land-grant institution. Underneath the mission statement, much like your text discusses, you will see the goals. And actually, interestingly enough, if I read through these goals, I found it interesting that even after reading the mission statement, most of them really apply to the student-centered kinds of things in terms of on-campus or people enrolled in formal programs here. And very few enhance the reputation of Utah, the university's learning, discovery, and engagement. This was really the only one of the 10 that was really based on this last one, serving the public through learning, discovery, and engagement. I found that interesting. One third of what really is the purpose of a land-grant institution is only 1/10 of the university goals, because you can look through here. I don't need to read them all, but infuse energy into graduate programs, build socially, intellectually vibrant campus, raise base level compensation for faculty. These are all kind of goals really related to the core of the actual university and not so much extension. In fact, even research is not mentioned as much inside of this particular mission statement. That aside, I'm just pointing that out to you that that's what Utah State's mission is. Those are their goals, and in your chapter also talks about mission, goals, and objectives, which is what we'll talk about through this overview. I then went to the extension pages because actually an individual asked me the other day, what is the mission of extension? And you can't find those exact words Googling the mission of Utah State University Extension, but Utah State University Extension provides research-based programs. Okay, that's taking this stuff from the university, the research that's conducted here, and resources with the goal of improving the lives of individuals, families, and communities throughout Utah. Hence, the intervention or the program, you will, to get that research-based types of knowledge from the university out into the state at large. USU Extension operates through cooperative agreement between the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Utah State University, county governments, and programs areas include, and this is then the program areas, remember underneath the organization, Ag and Natural Resources, Gardening, Home Family, and Utah 4-H and Youth. And then under each one of those, there are individual programs or project areas, if you will. And then it talks a little bit about founded in 1914, Extension plays a primary role in helping Utah State University fulfill its land grant mission, which I already spoke to you about. Through more than 100 years, though more than 100 years old, USU Extension is as vital as ever, and perhaps even more so due to the increased diversity and complexity of issues that people encounter today. And it goes on. And so this is really just on the About Us part of Utah State University Extension's page. It doesn't directly say that this is the mission, but I guess you could actually say, because it's part of Utah State University, the mission of Utah State University is all-encompassing, and this is maybe just a drill down a little bit more detail about the program areas and extension and what their role really is. Maybe that's the goal. The goal is to improve lives of individuals, families, and communities underneath the mission of Utah State University. So there you have it, big organization, missions. Sometimes you'll also see in strategic plans of organizations, they also have a vision statement. Your text didn't talk about having a vision statement, but that is also a very common thing to see out inside of programs or organizations. Vision statements are almost even smaller. In fact, I've got one right here. I worked with the Agriculture in the Classroom program, and I think it was 2013 where we revised and took a look at the mission of Agriculture in the Classroom programs nationally. Each state had its own mission statement. Some did, some did not. But we thought, you know, cohesively together, what is the mission of Agriculture in the Classroom nationally? So myself and probably about 12 other individuals bounced around a bunch of different ideas, put them up there, ranked them through kind of what we call a SWOT analysis and a strategic planning process. But we came up with this term after looking at the literature and discussing really what agriculture in the classroom is nationwide. It is to increase agricultural literacy through K-12 education, really just focusing on the formal stuff, formal classrooms. An agriculturally literate person is defined as one who understands and can communicate the source and value of agriculture that affects our quality of life. Because the mission statement had in it agricultural literacy, the group felt like we really need to define that because that might not be a known term to all. And then it talks about what program seeks to do, and this is a little bit of an explanation, if you will, of the mission, and it kind of gets at the goals of the organization. In fact, you could probably label this goals. And then down here, the Ag in the Classroom vision statement is that agriculture is valued by all. So you'll see these kinds of things in various organizations, whether they be in industry, non-governmental, governmental types of organizations, and it just gives people a clear picture of what that organization is all about. Your text makes this point about the difference between goals and objectives. I mean, this is crucial. In fact, it's on the quiz. Goals and objectives provide a framework for action. That's why I think this chapter is so incredibly important. This is the heart of this class, this particular chapter. Goals establish a general direction of the program. Objectives establish the precise expectations of what the program is attempting to achieve, and it includes a time frame, which they talk about in initial, intermediate, and long-term outcomes, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So that's a really important thing about structure and organization, and sometimes I look at an organization if I don't know what their mission is, and I talk about this in an interview that I provided with you that I did with Andrea Bravo Walker this week. You can have, if you're not clear about your mission, you don't stay true to your mission, you get something called mission creep. And then you're doing all kinds of things out there, chasing ambulances with the money to try and have an impact. And before you know it, you're really somewhat irrelevant to lots of different people. So listen to that interview with Andrea and you'll hear a little bit more about that. Some of you may have heard of these SMART objectives, or I've seen them also called SMART goals. But as I look at what SMART stands for, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based, I would say that really it's more closely related to the actual objectives. Although, as you saw in your reading, there's a lot of overlap. But requirements for all objectives, they need to be clear, and I'm going to spend some time on that. The clarity there of exactly what's trying to be accomplished. The expected results are noted, measurable results. And I'm going to make a point about this. Make sure that in your measurable results that you underpromise and you overdeliver. For example, don't make outlandish kinds of ideas of results that you think you can achieve when somebody else reads your proposal or project that you're trying to get going, or that you've established some sort of track record in a program and you're reporting about what you think you're going to be able to do in the future. If you put it out there and it seems unachievable, no one's going to believe you. So it's better to underpromise and over-deliver, but promise enough that people think that is a result that we need. I actually had a problem with this in a grant that I submitted some years ago when I learned a lot from it. But I put in the budget, I had these lofty objectives, and I put in the budget amount that the reviewers of the grant did not think was possible. They did not think it was possible that I could get that work done at that price to meet that particular objective. And the way it was written, they were right. But what I forgot to put in there is that I would be using undergraduate and graduate students to do a lot of the work, and they get paid less. So I needed to really explain that a little bit more, but that was one of the reasons that that grant didn't get kicked back, and I learned a lot from that lesson. Time frame is something that's going to need to be incorporated into your objectives, and your chapter makes a good table about that. It talks about initial, or sometimes I've seen that called short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. And of course, long-term outcomes, oops, I need to put a closed print on that side. Long-term outcomes are what we're really hoping to have, because that's our expected overall outcomes. It's just that sometimes that's difficult to get to. Time, money constraints, tracking individuals, especially in a program that provides people a service of some sort. And again, I ask you about that on the quiz, to really think about why it's difficult sometimes to get those intermediate and long-term outcomes, even though those long-term outcomes are really about the impact you're going to make. Target of change, what is the population we're looking at? Criteria for measurement, it gives some good examples for that. How are you going to measure, and how are you going to decide if you've hit the mark? Are you going to create a measure? Are you going to use an instrument that's already been used, that has established what those marks might be? Or are you going to need to create one and establish its reliability and validity for that particular program? And that is something we spend a lot of time in program evaluation, and we'll spend a lot of time in the advanced program evaluation course. Again, is it achievable? If it doesn't seem realistic, may not get funded, or people won't believe that that really can take place. And then you basically are seen as an underperformer. Clearly communicated assigned responsibilities. Oftentimes in grants, you'll see a table with what's going to be objective, the activities that are going to take place, and then who's responsible. Is it the project director? Is it technical support, or another faculty member, another member of your training team? And you'll see actual names. And when you put actual names in a project, you usually have to attach their resume or vita, so that the persons who are funding that project go, yes, that person has the skill set to be able to accomplish that particular objective. So keep that in mind. Requirements for all objectives. I think this is a really important part of the chapter, and it gives you some good definitions. Now, one thing I want to add some clarification to. The chapter then goes on somewhat in your mind, you know how we are very linear in the way we progress and think about the reading. But it goes to the outcome objectives and talks a lot about those, and then comes back and talks about the process objectives. Think about your text viewing this as almost a backward design. These are outcomes. When we look at the logic model, they're on the far right if we're going left to right. And that's what we're hoping is going to happen. That's where the big impacts are. But your text is talking about outcomes objectives in the middle. And so don't get confused that goes kind of in the middle of the flow chart of a logic model. It doesn't. It's just that they put this here because once you determine your outcome objectives, Now you have that framework that you can work backward to the intervention. You can work backward to the process objectives. So it's shoved in the middle, but when you see it in the logic model, it comes to the end. Those of you who are educators know that's backward design. You begin with the end in mind. And so they discuss that somewhat in the middle of the chapter. Outcome objectives then are centerpieces of the program plans. They explain the reason for the existence of the program as well as the project's measurable results. What's going to happen at the end of the day? Outcome objectives should state clearly what effects the intervention is expected to have on the target population, very specifically, and that's when you use that measurement tool that you've either created or has already been created that you're using as a yardstick for your success. Process objectives. Now, going back to logic model, that's back under activities. That's back toward more the middle. Process objectives then are intended to spell out the milestones necessary to achieve the intermediate outcome objectives. So make sure you're understanding that and how they differ. And if that visualization helps you, that you start with the end in mind, I think that it'll make sense to you as you read the chapter or as you have read the chapter. Maybe go back and review it, especially when you are taking this week's GIST quiz. Writing objectives, again, clarity, measurability, and I put this quote in from your text because I think it really hammers home what they need to look like in terms of measurability, but develop objectives that have behavioral aspects. At the end of the day, we're usually looking at behavioral changes in these programs, measured by a multitude of ways, but examples of these would include statements that begin with verbs such as write, list, increase, reduce, terminate, or demonstrate. Examples that use vague, non-behaviorable kinds of things, in other words, not observable, reference might include statements that begin with verbs such as understand, know, realize, feel, believe, or enable. They're really kind of warm and fuzzy kinds of things, and you don't have a handle on whether you've actually achieved your desired outcome. I would consider using Bloom's taxonomy. Those of you who are educators in the group are very familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, actions, verbs, and you may have seen it as this hierarchy or pyramid of the types of questions that you can ask related to understanding or learning, if you will. But Bloom has definitions of remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And probably creating in a lot of these programs may or may not fit because they're really targeted towards a specific problem that's taking place, and you're asking for a different behavior. It may result in somebody needs to create something, but probably you're more likely down in this applying and analyzing. So when you're writing your objectives for your plan, use Bloom's words. These are these kind of measurable things, and not every single one will be measurable, but examine to what degree you would have to add that. But for example, if they are able to actually plan their budget for a year, that's an actual thing that you can see. It's visual, it's observable, it's measurable. So consider using these kinds of words when you're developing your objectives. Again, back to the logic model. I keep putting this in so you understand the flow of these things, even though your text is talking about outcome objectives kind of in the center, then they switch to impact, and they go from outcomes to process to impact. The flow is still like this. It's just that they are talking about understanding your ends and then the means for how you're going to get there. And so I think this is a really simplistic way to show you how the logic model flows together with all the different terminology and where it fits. Notice that there are process objectives and there are outcome objectives, and there is a difference, and you can read that part in the text, but I think you understand that there are certain things or milestones or tasks in a process, and then the outcome is the actual, we might call it dependent variable, what we are hoping to see change. So that's something that I think gets a little confusing by the way they've structured the chapter. I also worked on in 2013 a logic model for agricultural literacy, and I don't know if I've shown this before or not, but again, this is in case you haven't seen this, is situation, inputs, outputs, outcomes. We have knowledge, attitudes, and skills. We're looking for behavioral kinds of changes here. We're looking at the behavioral practices, and then the condition will change over here. Agricultural policies positively impact global health, food technology, environment, and the economy. That's the hopeful, desired, long-term impact that we hope to be able to see by having an agricultural literacy program. So I just throw that in there. If any of you are interested in looking at it more closely, it's easy to find logic model for agricultural literacy. But it does flow together with these outputs and outcomes, and it's just another way to display and it is program dependent. You know, some programs can have more long-term things because people are engaged in them long-term, some more intermediate, some might be a program for an initial change based on, it could be a thesis or something that's going to be, I don't want to say one and done, but one and done in respect that it supports a body of literature that other researchers can take and run the ball with later. So this thing is not cut and dry, and that's why when you did your critique of them online and looked at the different, when you Googled logic models and looked at all the different types, you saw that they had mostly the same elements, but some were a little bit different. Yes, but at the end of the day, you still are looking at, let's go back to this kind of thing right here. In some way, shape, or form, these things need to be covered with your outcome objectives. Hopefully that you'll have impacts. We also then made a really pretty logic model out of it for a poster, just to get people like interested in what it is what we were trying to do. You know, situation statement is up here. We started with the inputs that we had, the outputs, and of course this was an agricultural example to get folks to see how we hoped that ag literacy programs would be able to be measured and show that they made a difference for our desired outcomes. So this is a lot of work, creating these logic models in program planning, but it's kind of like front end work. If you do this on the front end, you aren't scrambling on the back end or in the middle of a project going, what are we supposed to be doing? What's our mission? What activities should we do? You've done this front end piece, and then it's like, come to work. Things are like, this is what I need to be about doing today. This is how I need to move forward in this program. But in the era of accountability, think about that back to chapter 1. Performance measurement is an expectation, not an option. So these kinds of things are not, honestly, if you are even if you're in private industry does not want to waste money. Government does not want to waste money. They don't want, well, sometimes they do waste money by some people's standards, but taxpayers don't want to see money wasted. How's that? So those are the kinds of things that you have to consider when you are thinking, oh, is it worth it? In addition to the logic model, you may be asked to develop an education or a marketing plan with these programs, and also a sustainability plan. I've looked at several National Science Foundation proposals or RFAs recently. They asked for logic models. They also asked for a education plan. I push /marketing because they want a campaign. They want to know that you have a way to get the word out about the intervention or the program that you're putting forth in the proposal. And so because I'm in education, I'll get calls from various departments that they're not educators and they don't know what an education plan looks like. And so they'll ask me to partner in, and they'll want to write me into the contract for maybe 10% of the of what's going on in that project. So that is something that you'll see in a request for application or request for a proposal, RFA, RFP, to give you some terminology. And more recently now, especially government is asking for sustainability plan. In other words, they want to just give you seed money. They don't want to keep you money over year after year after year. They want to see a sustainability plan. How will this program sustain itself once this one request for dollars goes away? So you'll see that as well in this era of accountability. And it is related to your logic models. It requires a lot of planning on your part to say, how can we keep this going in perpetuity? Or if you think that your plan is so awesome that it solves the problem completely, you might say other funding will be sought, or with this program's intervention, if it doesn't work, we'll go back to the drawing board because there is no sustainability for it. And if it does work really well and the problem goes away, you don't need the program anymore anyway. A strategic plan may also be necessary depending on the program. This includes the mission, vision, and strategic goals. See page 27 in your text. So they might want to see some people call this a business plan or a strategic plan for your organization as an attachment to see what is it you're all about, what is your mission and vision, to see if it aligns with that organization. All right, so that's setting goals and objectives. You're making a plan, you're getting to work, and you're sticking to it, and hopefully you reach your goals. Make sure you know the differences between all the different terminology in there, and that should help you to prepare your own program proposals for this semester, especially when it comes to writing clear and measurable objectives.